Victory Games was so much more than just a subsidiary of the Avalon Hill Game Company. Although it ran for only 7 years, its impact on the board game hobby was significant. In this video, we will delve into the history of Victory Games here on Legendary Tactics. In preparing and researching for this video, I had the honor and pleasure of speaking with the former head of Victory Games, Mark Herman. His insights and memories were key to allowing me to put together this video, as there isn't a lot of material available about Victory Games on or offline. The story begins in 1982 when SPI, Avalon Hill's main competitor, fell on hard financial times and was acquired by TSR, famous for being the original publisher of Dungeons & Dragons.
I came back to the company from a job in DC, working in defense consulting. And I came back to SPI in 81. Yeah, in 81. And the company, you're a financial guy, so you'll understand their cash flow is terrible, and because of the way that they, remember, the internet hasn't become a sales engine then, right? It was just sort of like it was an information, look up stuff, and there was no World Wide Web either at this time.
Yeah.
So unless you knew how to use Gopher and you were in a university, there was no internet to speak of. And their transition into retail, we were just people who owed us money, and cash flow was terrible, and and they were into all this money with the printers, and you don't have Kickstarter, and you don't have even GMT P500, which precedes so the whole idea of getting your orders before you go to the printer, we were behind in arrears in the printer, so we were just in a terrible financial state. And TSR didn't buy the company as much as they loaned the company money to keep it in operation, and but they secured the loan like with the company basically.
No.
And the three guys running the place were great people, love them, all three of them. Well, I love two of them. I like Chris Wagner. He's a very, very gentleman guy. I just didn't know, he's not a very warm. He wasn't like a guy I knew well, but he was a very fair, smart guy. And then and he was the financial guy, and apparently not as good as we had hoped he would be. And then you had Redmond, of course, who was a great friend, but trying to keep the company alive. Then you had Brad Hessel. The three of them were running the company. They got this loan from TSR. And then basically, after like 1 month of the loan, they foreclosed on us. Basically, it was like hostile. I call it more of a corporate hostile takeover.
Yeah.
And then the TSR at the time, there was the Bloom family was, I believe. Well, there was two brothers. They both showed up at the company after they were basically foreclosing on it, and they interviewed me for. To come to Lake Geneva. They were basically saying, but the way it came across was like I was an indentured servant who was moving to Wisconsin to continue what I was doing for them. And one, I didn't want to go. I mean, I actually have been to Lake Geneva. It's a lovely place. So all good to Wisconsin, but I'm a New York kid, and I didn't want to leave the city, and my wife didn't want to leave the city, and we had a new daughter, and we didn't ask her, but she didn't want to leave the city.
Yeah.
And because we said so, and and so I was doing like the defense consulting and being a game designer for SPI, so I was hunting around to start a company.
SPI had some world-class designers, and Avalon Hill created Victory Games to house a core group of them, offering a combination of creative freedom without the crazy publication schedule that SPI had tried to maintain. What resulted was a well-respected company that published a line of influential titles. While SPI games tended to lean towards more complex simulations, Victory Games tried to find the balance between games that would satisfy the so-called grognards while maintaining a solid level of commercial success.
And I went to see this guy named Eric Dott, who was the so you like Avalon Hill Games. So it was a printing company had acquired them for their debts long ago, which had been started by Charles Roberts, and it was called the Monarch Avalon Inc. was the name of the company. And
Mhm.
Monarch Avalon Inc. was a big printing company. It had three divisions. One was just standard high rate printing, which and then they had this really cool engraving division, like like really cool stuff, like really specialized printing, like where they make the whole. It was really kind of cool stuff, but we didn't use them very much. And then there was Avalon Hill and Eric Dott. When I went to talk to Eric Dott about starting this company, what I was thinking about, he said to me, um, he wanted to start a new publishing company like Avalon Hill. It could be he wanted if we wanted to be he wanted us down there, but if we wanted to be in New York, he was good with that. Was his basic concession that we could still all stay in New York, which was a big deal. And his strategy, which was short and brilliant because you could explain it in one sentence, was he could only get so much shelf space in the retail outlets, and he wanted another label so he could double his shelf space. That was the
Oh,
entire strategy and reason why this businessman, who was a very good businessman, by the way, unlike the ones we had at SPI, that was his entire strategy for why Victory Games would exist. And we rented a space almost right next to the Empire State Building in New York, which makes it Midtown. And it was it was 3 rooms, three rooms, and they sent us up all this old, you remember he had a company, so we got all this old furniture, real industrial. But the best thing they gave us was it was the biggest. It was like an old camera house light table. The light table was spectacular. I mean,
wow.
it was ginormous, and it was the best light table I've ever worked. It's right. It was you could stand at it. It was you know lots of light, so you could really do some. So we did that was a very productive spot for
Yeah,
me. I could do all my tracing, and I could look at things, and it was really good.
that's
Uh,
great.
and then we had, and eventually, we got some kind of computer. This is the very beginning of computers. They gave us this really, I don't know. The problem with working with the Avalon Hill guys is that they they had their way of doing things, and they were the boss. And but on the technology side, they were just like some guy would show them something, they get very excited about it, and we would end up with it. It would be a piece of, garbage. It was hard to use. And we finally talked. So what we finally did was we were going so crazy with this computer system they got us. We just couldn't get any work done, and they
Yeah,
couldn't understand why. So we all decided we cut a deal with a retail wing. We all bought our own. Remember the original Apple computers? They were like there's almost it's an icon on,
yep, I remember.
we all just bought our own. We all bought our own Apple computers.
Yeah, those are the Apple IIs, I think, weren't they?
I don't remember. It's the famous one, which is it's a white box. It's got a monitor, and by
Yep.
the way, the big deal is we had 2 disk drives. That was you couldn't because remember there was no RAM practically. Whatever, I don't remember what the RAM was, but it was a double digit kind of RAM, like 16 or something like that, some number, and you had to have the operating system and the application on one disk, and then we would have another disk where you could save the files.
Yeah,
For that, you had to get everything on one disk, and that could get rough after a while.
yeah,
Because transferring files was very hard to do. So the 2 disk drive was critical, and then that's how all those, and that's really helped. And then what we did was we managed to take those files and get them into the stupid computer system so they could use it. It was
yeah.
all, so, but and and of course, the original company was when we all resigned on the same day. Sadly, we resigned. The only guy from the corporate, the executive committee was Redmond, so we all resigned to Redmond, and that was sad because we all really liked Redmond, and he felt bad
Yeah.
that and you have to say he wasn't mad at us. He was like he had failed, and
No.
and makes me want to cry now thinking about it, but so but we all so it was so the 4 guys from R&D was myself, and it was myself, John Butterfield, Eric Lee Smith, and Chris Klug. In those days, he went by, if you look in your James Bond, he went by Jerry Klug then, but he's Chris
Oh,
Klug. That's
okay.
Chris Klug. And then we had Trish was one of the office people, and then there was Jerry Glickenhaus, who would be our sales manager, and then we had Ted Kohler, who was from the art department, and Bob Ryer from the art department, and that was the original crew. And then not long after, we ended up hiring Rosario Baldari in the art department, and Robert Kern in editorial. Michael Moore, who was at SPI, came back from Microsoft to be in the editorial.
Wow.
And that was the missing some. Oh, and then we found Eric Dott showed me this artist, a guy named Jim Talbot, who was very, very talented. And we convinced him that he didn't want to live in Baltimore. He wanted to be in New York. And Eric said, okay. So he was our artist. And that was the whole crew.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So that was our Victory Games crew. And we took with us, we all had like proposals that we were going to work on for SPI. We just took those proposals with us. And all the first games were things that would have gotten published by SPI eventually, if they ever got done.
And so it began with Victory Games publishing their first titles in 1983.
Your first design for Victory Games was Gulf Strike, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
Yeah.
And John Butterfield did Hell's Highway. That was it's the market game. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Eric Lee did the Civil War.
Yeah.
I was very big on naming things like for what they were without a lot of complication in the title.
Gulf Strike is a game that simulates conflict in the Persian Gulf in the 1980s on a strategic level. Air, land, and sea elements combine with the updates and expansions to allow players to step into a leadership role during any number of historical or plausible conflicts, using over 900 counters. John Olson in the magazine known as The Wargamer said that the game is for those gamers favoring higher complexity games with an interest in modern era combat. The production values are quite high and an excellent visual product is the result. Ellis Simpson in Games International magazine noted that the game is complex, having a 60-page rulebook, but that Gulf Strike is for gamers who want to play, to learn, and enjoy. Winning is not everything. Interestingly, the third edition of the game featured the face of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, as it included an expansion that had been released to recreate Desert Shield and the First Gulf War. A copy of the first edition of the game is kept at the Strong National Museum of Play. Avalon Hill published a video game based on Gulf Strike for the Apple II, Atari 8-bit, Commodore 64, and for DOS-based systems. Hell's Highway is an operational level simulation of Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne campaign of World War II. In September 1944, 3 Allied airborne divisions dropped behind German lines in Holland to seize and hold roads and bridges until British ground forces, the 30th Corps, could break through to link up. The game allows players to trace the slow advance of the 30th Corps, drop paratroopers on key bridges, and launch sudden panzer attacks against those same paratroopers who are holding on for dear life. It offers 3 scenarios and variable deployment options to fully explore the history. It is a game that was great at the time, but by some accounts hasn't aged all that well. The Civil War 1861 to 1865 board game is a comprehensive simulation of the American Civil War, covering everything from major battles led by Grant and Lee to Indian raids in the Western Territories. It even features extensive treatment of naval and riverine warfare, with a map spanning from the eastern seaboard to the middle of Texas. Players manage generic strength points representing troops, about 5,000 men per strength point, and use command points to perform various actions like moving soldiers, constructing fortifications, and adding naval units. The game is divided into turns made up of an indefinite number of pulses, with players choosing how to prioritize each of the 3 theaters of war each turn. Historical leaders with varying ranks and abilities play a crucial role, and players earn victory points by capturing cities and achieving strategic objectives. Optional rules add complexity, and scenarios allow for shorter gameplay, as the full game can take up to 20 hours to play. Overall, the game is ambitious in scope and detail, providing a comprehensive simulative experience of the Civil War. Among the first games published was perhaps the most iconic the company ever produced, Ambush. It is a solitaire game designed by John Butterfield and Eric Lee Smith, wherein players create a squad of individual World War II soldiers and send them on missions in Western Europe. The map's contents are gradually revealed through a cardboard slide device that tells you, hex by hex, whether you have encountered an enemy soldier, something that adds to the narrative, or nothing at all. The fact that the enemy is perfectly hidden creates unbelievable tension. Ambush feels like a high-stakes choose-your-own-adventure, and the influence of Dungeons & Dragons on its design is obvious, but it remains an interesting game, unique in many ways by the standards of the day, and even those of today. It was successful enough to spawn a trilogy of expansions, Move Out in 1984, Purple Heart in 1986, and Silver Star in 1987. It also led to another game set in the Pacific Theater, Battle Hymn, that we will touch on later. Although it wasn't the first, it went on to inspire other designers to create solitaire wargames, some of which are Victory Games titles.
Eric Lee had Ambush, which is and then John, Ambush became a little bit of it was primarily Eric and John, but it was almost like a group project because it was just the checking of that thing was.
Oh, geez.
I had said to Bob Ryer, we were trying to think about how would you do the paragraph thing, and I said to Bob Ryer, remember those we used to, this is a million years ago, nobody would ever do something like this, but you used to go to gas station, they would give you this miles per gallon calculator, which was just a slide.
Yeah.
So that I said to Bob Ryer, why can't we do something with like that? And then Bob Ryer took that idea and made the famous Ambush paragraphs, these things. And that's all hand. You see the first one handmade with him cutting out the little. And registering that thing. Oh my God, that was painful. And
it's so clever, though. So clever.
Like I said, Ambush was a little bit of everybody, but mostly Eric Lee and John. John did the cover. John's has a certain he's very John Butterfield is ridiculously talented and has multiple. He's an artist. He's a designer. He's gonna do anything pretty much. And so he did the cover for the original Ambush, actually, because Jim Talbot hadn't come along yet. And Gull Strike was, the covers and the first covers were very graphic because Ted was doing them, and Ted's not an artist. That's not right. He's a graphic artist, not a painting artist. He was also very good with they used to call, what do you call it, an air pen?
Oh, like airbrushing or whatever.
Airbrushing, that's exactly the word I'm looking for. Yeah, he was Ted said, came to me and said, can I get this airbrush thing? I said, sure. So we got this airbrush thing and he started using it. He got pretty good at it, actually, because it was like brand new technology then.
Yeah.
The thing. And in fact, he did it very nice. I was reading in C3I magazine. He did they interviewed him, and I was really glad they had done that. He was a very talented guy. He was very calm, which we needed. We had enough. He was a no drama guy, but he just got everything done, and he was just a good guy. I really liked Ted. I hope I run into him again before the end of days.
NATO, the Next War in Europe, is an operational level wargame simulating a potential conflict between NATO and the Warsaw Pact in Central Europe. The game covers the area from Denmark to the Swiss Alps and from France to Poland. The game is designed for a single sitting and offers a blend of ease of play and complexity with features like unit differentiation, command structure, air power, force projection, chemical weapons, and tactical nuclear warfare. It is colorful, especially by the standards of the day, but the rules are famously hard to grasp, especially the airspace rules. James Bond 007 Role-Playing in Her Majesty's Secret Service is a tabletop role-playing game set in the world of James Bond books and films. Designed by Gerard Christopher Klug, the game and its supplements were released between 1983 and 1987 until the license expired. It was regarded as the most popular espionage role-playing game during its time of publication, selling over 100,000 copies. It was translated into French, Japanese, and Spanish. Nick Davison in Imagine magazine called it an excellent game for those primarily interested in role-playing rather than combat. It is not recommended for more than 3 players and is best with less. In his 1990 book, The Complete Guide to Role-Playing Games, Rick Swan wrote, "Why James Bond never attracted the audience it deserved remains one of gaming's biggest mysteries. It stands as one of the most exciting and inventive RPGs ever published, a masterful effort. Swan rated the game 3.5 out of 4, saying that no spy game surpasses James Bond in excitement and wittiness, and none is more skillfully designed. After a great start, Victory Games was off and running with some great titles coming out in 1984. 1809 Napoleon's Danube Campaign by Kevin Zucker is a strategic wargame that depicts 3 months of intense conflict between Napoleon's forces and the Austrian army in the Danube Valley. The game features battles such as Abensberg, Ratisbon, Ebelsberg, Aspern, Essling, and Wagram, covering over 200 miles of terrain. The system design emphasizes command, logistics, and lines of communication, as players command divisions and brigades, with each turn representing 2 days, and each hex on the map representing 2 miles. The game includes historic leaders, optional rules for hidden movement, and combat effectiveness, and 4 scenarios ranging from short battles to lengthy campaigns.
Yes, that's so. So what we also started doing was a lot of what I call friends of the family. We got freelancers, so you ended up with so 1809 is Kevin Zucker,
Yes.
and really a precursor to his his famous Napoleonic series, various series that he's done, and then you had a very young Nick Karp who was still who had done stuff at SPI but now did Vietnam for us. And then Joe Bolkowski, another SPI star, did Korean War. Then Greg Kostikian did Britannia.
Cold War is a 4 and only 4-player game where each player commands the economic, military, and intelligence forces of a major world power. The goal is to seize political, military, and economic control of as much of the world as possible. Each enemy has their own bag of tricks and a shared national interest in the different regions of the world, so players must be crafty. The game is played on a map with regions, each with an economic value. Players use diplomats/agents, the workhorses of the game, for diplomatic or intelligence roles. Vital regions chosen by players have special rules and high economic value for that side. Controlling others' vital regions incurs a cost to them, and control of the Middle East extracts economic points from all players, creating natural competition. Event cards affect income and colony auctions, and action cards degrade enemy units and block such actions. The game ends on an event card draw, usually between turns 7 to 10. The game is designed to be easy to learn, with only a 10-page rulebook, enjoyable and challenging to win. It has been said that the gameplay can be a bit formulaic, but it walks an interesting line between taking itself lightly and deadly seriously.
Oh, Cold War was John Prados. May he rest in peace. And Bob Ryer, though, really redid that. Yes, it was John's design, but the development was extensive from Bob Ryer on Cold War. But which, by the way, it's kind of funny. It's all about timing. Obviously the components and all that, but Cold War predates Twilight Struggle, which is again, like a phenomenon, evergreen game on the Cold War. But the problem with Cold War is we were still in the Cold War.
Yeah.
There was no nostalgia for the Cold War while it was still going on. So it was, but it does the same thing. It has a headline phase. Where you actually pull a card, and it does the same influence thing. It's a game that I actually still play once in a well. It's great. It's actually a great game.
Wow. I don't know if Jason Matthews mentioned it as an influence, but
well, that's kind of but it is definitely it's so much like it's not a card-driven game. It just the cards were for like the headline and kind of random event stuff, so it's not Twilight Struggle, but the topic and the kind of the general treatment of events and influence is definitely what the game is about. And that was Prados's vision. This is John Prados's, Third Reich and all this. I mean, great designer. So it was a very clever idea. It just needed a lot of development. The rules, smoothed down. That was what Bob Ryer was, epic. It was an epic. He was like one of the best editors I've ever seen. Still, talked to him just not too long ago. He's fine, retired. Plays with his lawn a lot, but he's in good shape. Thank God.
Move Out is the first expansion for Ambush. It introduces 4 new challenging scenarios along with additional weapons, vehicles, and enemies. These scenarios are designed to provide a tougher challenge for veteran characters who have survived the base game's 8 missions. The expansion includes 60 new character and vehicle cards, 11 new mission cards, and a new paragraph mission booklet.
Because those things were a lot of work,
Well,
with all the
first off, you
storytelling.
have to imagine what, you have to almost create a story,
Yeah.
and then you have to create the paragraphs, and then you got to like encode them into that sleeve thing, and then the checking is nuts because any errata, the game goes off the rails because you get to a where it says go to paragraph 3, but paragraph 3 makes no sense.
Yes.
You get you get directed into a hole.
Panzer Command, the Gateway to Stalingrad, is a tactical level simulation of armored combat on the steppes of the Eastern Front of World War II. As expected, players take on the roles of the German or Russian commanders of the era. The game is known for its chit pull system and its detailed and realistic approach to armored warfare, with a focus on historical accuracy and strategic decision-making. The game is designed for 2 players and offers a challenging and immersive experience for those interested in this aspect of the military history of World War II, with the only drawbacks being the sheer amount of die rolling in the game, and that there is only 1 map and only 5 scenarios. Matrix Games came out with a computer game of the same name in 2006, which focuses on the battles around Stalingrad in 1942 and 1943.
Now that's Eric Lee, and that's a cool game, very cool game. That one is, we were hoping that was going to become like a series, but I guess it never did. But it's a good one-off game on, tank warfare in the Eastern Front. I mean, that's what it's about.
The Vietnam War, 1965 to 1975, is infamous for its length, depth, and complexity. This simulation game recreates the Vietnam War in great detail, covering its military and political aspects. The rules are comprehensive, including movement, terrain, search and destroy operations, special operations, firepower, air mobility, riverines, brigade-level formations, limited intelligence, and auxiliary units. Scenarios range from small-scale engagements like Operation Starlight to the extensive campaign scenario, which spans the entire war from 1965 to 1975. The campaign scenario introduces additional complexities such as South Vietnamese politics, morale, strategic bombing, reinforcements, and pacification efforts. Unit counters represent battalions and regiments. The game attracted some criticism for dealing with a subject that was still painful to many Americans. It was noted that even as late as the 1990s, it was still seen to be too recent, but now gaming Vietnam appears increasingly accepted. Hervé Hatt, in a review, called the game ambitious and noted that American audiences now had enough perspective to appreciate its theme. He criticized the cover art but praised the map's beauty. However, he warned that the game was complex and time-consuming. For those of you who are not afraid to lay out the map for many weeks, for aficionados of contemporary monster wargaming.
I gotta tell you, so Nick comes in from Princeton, and with the prototype, and I sit down with him and we play this scenario, and it's the one where they're chasing down that NVA regiment, like the 66th Regiment or something like that. It's that first scenario in the game. And I played it. I said, "Oh, this is..." And by the way, remember, what has it got, like 20 pieces on the board, and we finished the scenario in like 4 hours. I mean, now of course we're talking, but it was at least a 2+ hour scenario, just that. Yeah, that's fine. I said, okay. So then I said to him, "Okay, so what other scenarios are you thinking about?" He goes, "Oh, I was just going to do this and the campaign game, which is the and I think 100 hours, by the way, is an underestimate, by the way." So I said to him, I need 10 scenarios. The 10th one could be I need smaller scenarios. He sort of followed. So if you play the original Vietnam game, like the first 4 are maybe 5, half of them are you can play in a session. The other 5 start becoming core set. They get large very quickly. So, but the game, people fell in love with that game because it really captured something that was missing from the other Vietnam games, other than, let's say, Grunt, which was fantastic. So that was a big hit.
1985 was an interesting year for Victory Games as the output was quite varied. Pacific War is a strategic war game that covers the entire Pacific theater of World War II, from the attack on Pearl Harbor to the end of the war in 1945. It spans locations from Australia to China, from Burma to Hawaii, and includes major battles like Guadalcanal and the defense of Wake Island. The game is designed for both solo and multiplayer play, offering engagement scenarios for solitaire play, and increasingly complex battle, campaign, and strategic scenarios, 21 in all, for 2 or more players. Players manage a variety of aspects including strategic bombing, merchant shipping, search and detection, and conducting amphibious assaults. It's an ambitious game with high complexity. There are 56 pages of rules, there are over 2,300 counters, and yet it only has one 10-sided die. That said, Pacific War is known for its historical accuracy and provides a challenging and exciting experience for players interested in the Pacific campaigns of World War II.
Well, like I said, I had the luxury and the privilege to have the time to really work on it. I had no other distraction. The only distraction I had, and I'm in my daughter's house now with her with her daughter. She's 40 now, but at the time she was not even she was born in 83, so she's not even quite 2 years old yet. Yeah. And literally I had this big monster game, two-map game, but all these pieces and all sitting on my this table I've been designing on for, forever. And she's on my knee, and she was just a good girl. I mean, she was just,
Yeah.
So she got project oversight. She was, she was
Was
there
the
the
credits?
whole time from day one. And the funny part is, when I did the remake for GMT, because of COVID, she was living with me again. So Pacific War had her as a 1-year-old, and it had her as a 38-year-old. It's just funny that how
Was she still supervising the gameplay, making sure you were?
We did put her in there, but now this time I had my granddaughter doing the supervision this time.
Okay.
Who's 7, and she's the one in Ireland right now. So yeah. 7, but who was then only she had her 3rd birthday there, so so she was 2. So I had her mother's daughter on my lap doing Pacific War the 2nd time. So yeah, it was just one of those things in life, just.
And that must have been quite a thing to remake, to bring that out and rebuild it from.
Well, as the remake was me being developer for a 33-year-old designer who I couldn't talk to anymore. And so, I was kind of at some level, obviously when I got back into, under the hood of the thing, and I've been playing it since I designed it in 85, but I was playing it, but when I actually had to republish it, what was I going to do? And what were the things that bothered me? And I was going to fix all that, which I did, by the way. But, getting under the hood of that thing, I was like, oh my God, when did I have the time to do this? And thinking, it was just so long. I would never design that game now. And that's not because it's a good or a bad thing. It's just my brain and how I've evolved from, I'm going to be 70 this year. I was 33 then. So a bit of a gap there in your evolution. I've been designing ever since then. So my thinking on how to do things has evolved. But I was basically, re-cloning a dinosaur from the ancient world and bringing it to life again. So it was an interesting experience.
Well, game design has also moved on. There's so many more tools in the toolbox now, and lots of different things to do. So
Purple Heart, the second expansion for Ambush, includes 6 new challenging scenarios set in locations beyond France in 1944. The expansion introduces new weapons, vehicles, enemies, and maps, offering a fresh experience for experienced characters. The scenarios take place in various locations and time periods, including the Ardennes in December 1944, south of Caen in July 1944, the Rhone Valley in 1944, and Western Germany in spring 1945. Dr. Ruth's Game of Good Sex is a board game designed by Dr. Ruth, offering a blend of humor, practical advice, and sexual education. Players accumulate arousal points by visiting Dr. Ruth's sex clinic, asking Dr. Ruth questions, and answering queries related to their sexual awareness. The game is easy to learn and provides couples with unlimited hours of amusing and informative dialogue. It's a bit of a strange choice for a strategic wargame company, but there could be no arguing with the sales, which topped 400,000 copies.
Okay. Yeah, I remember, but I was, what's humor, Jim Talbot was, I learned from Jim Talbot about art, phenomenal artist, by the way,
Yeah.
still is, I'm sure. I haven't talked to him in decades.
He did the art for almost all the games, didn't
Well,
he?
all the games after we got him in there. So
Yeah.
Butterfield did Ambush. I think Talbot comes right after that. And the two things I learned from cover art, one I learned from Jim, and Jim and I both learned from the Cubby Broccoli people, for James Bond. They so here you see how my clothes, I mean, they're wrinkled, right? And the
Yeah.
light's hitting them however it's hitting them. The thing that makes a piece of art look realistic is that.
Yeah.
And so Jim obviously can't imagine that. So I was Sarge, by the way. So they would stick me in this, like, we had this like little outfit, like somebody had brought in like an army, jacket and all this, and I would put it on and I'd hold like a toy gun. And so like on Silver Star, that's me standing there looking like this. Now the face, he created a new face for me because I'm not good looking. Sarge is Sarge, but the body is me, so, and all that, this crinkling stuff that he paints in is what makes it look so good.
Yes.
And when we were doing the James Bond one, the Cubby Broccoli people looked at the cover and said, the problem is it doesn't have any hot spots. And I didn't understand. So if you look at the James Bond cover carefully, you'll see these little like twinkly spots, which brings your eye in. And so those are the two things I learned about art from Victory Games.
Huh.
But that came from Silver Star and of course the GI Jane calendar, which was always an amusing story in and of itself.
What's the GI Jane calendar?
You don't know about the GI Jane? It was a 1 year thing. So Talbot. So you've seen like there was a guy named Vargas. You ever hear of him?
Yes. Yeah.
I think Vargas might even be Canadian, but I'm not. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, Vargas used to do these sort of very sexy girls in military clothing or in dressed provocatively, which today would be you just get crucified.
Yeah.
So I walk in one day and Talbot was always painting, even if we didn't have a cover. He was just painting all the time. That's what he does. And I walk in and he's got this. He used to take these catalogs, models, and he had painted this, redheaded girl, provocatively dressed. She was dressed, but she was, not entirely dressed in this army outfit. And I was like, don't you have anything better to do? So we go to this convention, and I didn't realize that the guys brought the picture with them, and they put it on the booth, and it was called, and it got a lot of attention. Bunch of portly guys, whatever was going on in their heads when they saw the picture, and so after that, I said to him, and calendars, there was a thing back in this period of time in the early '80s where calendars became like a thing. I don't know, not anymore. Now it's all online. But getting cool calendars, all of a sudden there was big calendar sales. I have no idea. This is one of those little moments in retail history. So I walk into Talbot after the convention. I said, okay, here's the deal. I want you to paint 12 of these, and we'll see what happens. So Talbot, dutifully in his spare time, made 12 of these, Vargas-like pictures of girls in, Navy uniforms and Air Force uniform, all this kind of stuff. And the reason that I had him do that is at the same time we had just done this game, Dr. Ruth's Game of Good Sex.
Yes.
Which
was a massive hit for Victory Games.
it sold more than everything else put together. No, not Dr. Ruth equaled all our other sales. I mean, in combination, I would say might even beat it. We sold like 450,000 of those, and the main buyer and where the big outlet is Spencer. You ever hear of something called Spencer Gifts?
Yes. Yeah. I've heard the name.
Spencer
Yeah.
Gifts. This thing sold like hot, and she was right. And she, by the way, when we were working with Dr. Ruth, she liked me, and I became part of her. Like when I became her driver. She would say to me, "Mark, I need to go to this place. You have your car?" I said, "Sure." So I was basically like, her big, little Jewish grandma, big Jewish kid, taking her to these various events. And, it's been the house. I mean, she's a wonderful woman, by the way. Fabulous
Yeah.
woman. She's really something else. Anyway, and so because of that, Spencer Gifts was our big outlet for selling Doctor Who's Game of Good Sex. And that game was done by a guy named Michael Moore, who had come back and he did the game.
Yeah.
And he did a great job. It was a trivia. Oh, that was the other thing. The Trivia Pursuit was big. So Doctor Who's Game of Good Sex is just a Trivia Pursuit game.
Yeah.
Same basic concept. So my buyer was this woman named Elaine Harkins, and after Talbot made these 12 paintings, I said to Elaine on a phone call, I said, "Hey, I want to pitch. I got a calendar that's these and I explained Vargas, and she knew what that everybody knew what that was, and she what she says to me, and this is again how everything just kind of comes together. Next week is a big retail show in New York, and I'm gonna be there. Why don't you bring him by? I'll tell you where you can meet me. You can show him to me." I said, "Fine." So I get this phone call, and she says, "Meet me at this bar somewhere in Midtown." And so Jim Talbot takes his 12 paintings. He puts them, those big art portfolio things.
Yep.
Paintings in there, and we trudge off to this bar. It turns out that we meet Elaine's there. Elaine's boss, who's the regional sales director for Spencer Gifts, and the head buyer, all women, the head buyer for Spencer Gifts is at the table. So I got the whole chain of command. I mean, and I had the decision maker sitting at the table. I mean, that's the unusual thing. So I sit down, and this woman's very, this is a no nonsense lady, and she goes, "Well, take them out. Let's take a look." So I said, "So Jim," so we're in this bar, and there was like these alcove, this is like kind of a shishi kind of bar. So it had these imagine like these circular alcoves off of the main room, where you have like these velvet, like a velvet continuous thing.
Yeah.
And so Jim just starts putting them on top of like where the cushion meets the wall.
Yeah.
And there's 12 of them. So we had to go through a couple of alcoves. We just put them all up. And the patrons go nuts for them. Men and women are going, "Oh my God, I buy this." So literally, this woman who's the head bar, whose name escapes me, I only really knew Elaine. She says, "I'll take 10,000."
Wow.
I mean, just like that. I'm like,
yeah.
Okay. Well, so I call up Eric Dott and I tell him, "Hey, listen, I want to do this calendar." But he goes, "Nobody wants calendar." I said, "I just showed it to this buyer and she gave me an order for 10,000. And he says, literally goes, "We're in the calendar business."
Yeah, I was going to say, forget board games.
So we did it 1 year.
Calendar business.
We did 1 year. It sold nicely. We sold them out. There was only like 10,000. The 10,000 what we sold.
Yeah.
But there was no appetite. Remember, I think the calendar was 1986, by the way.
Yeah.
And so, by 87, the company is starting to have harder times because computer game, the Atari games and the Atari and the similar like systems are now really starting to suck the oxygen out of the board game business. And board games were always even, except in the early days, was a niche of that. So the video games just, the Ataris started killing the market.
Yeah.
It wasn't a cash flow problem because remember we had Monarch Avalon, but it was the sales just started really suffering.
Victory Games also came out with 3 James Bond themed games that year. The back of the box of 007 James Bond Goldfinger says, "Team up with James Bond in the famous Aston Martin DB5. Can you outwit the Korean guards and Oddjob in this famous car chase? Every minute counts as you try to rescue Tilly Masterson and escape from Auric Enterprises." This is a two-player game where one player is James Bond in his Aston Martin, navigating the grounds of Auric Enterprises to find the Tilly Masterson card and then escape to win. Bond's car is equipped with special gadgets like machine guns, an oil slick, a smoke screen, and an ejection seat. The opposing player controls 4 enemy cars armed with machine guns. Additional cards include Oddjob Old Lady with a machine gun and a mirror card based on the movie. Bond starts with a guard in his car and must use the ejection seat to remove him. 007 Live and Let Die is a two-player game designed for ages 8 and up and is based on James Bond's escape from Kananga's men in a boat chase through the Louisiana Bayou, inspired by the movie Live and Let Die. Players control Bond or the pursuing henchman in a simple action-based game with small stand-up boats on a small abstract board. Despite its simplicity and somewhat dull board, it works well as a fast-paced game for kids. It's an extremely rare collector's item published only in England due to copyright issues and part of Victory Games' James Bond franchise. 007 The Man with the Golden Gun board game is a solitaire game where you, as James Bond, navigate through Scaramanga's funhouse maze to retrieve the Solex agitator and escape. The game involves a random map that changes each playthrough, with each room revealing different encounters described by cards. Challenges include facing Scaramanga, his henchman Knick-Knack, trigger-happy mannequins, and sliding floors. The goal is to escape the maze with the Solex agitator while avoiding being killed by Scaramanga or his traps. In the last of these games, You Only Live Twice, James Bond, piloting the one-man flying machine Little Nelly, investigates suspicious activity at a volcano. The mission quickly escalates into a deadly aerial combat as Bond faces enemy helicopters emerging from a hidden opening. In this game recreation of the movie scene, one player controls Bond, maneuvering around the board and utilizing various weapons, machine guns, missiles, rockets, flamethrower, and air mines to destroy the enemy helicopters. The opponent controls 4 helicopters, attempting to shoot down Little Nelly with machine guns. The board features dot/line spaces over a volcano painting, with different elevations affecting the difficulty of hitting targets. Mosby's Raiders, Guerrilla Warfare in the Civil War is a solitaire board game at the operational level where players command the partisan Rangers. The goal is to disrupt the Union's war efforts by infiltrating enemy lines. Success leads to increased Union efforts to stop you. Players select Union targets for raids and decide on the actions of Mosby's Raiders. As your notoriety grows, more Union troops join the pursuit. Players must decide whether to escape or engage in combat. Unexpected events like Union sweeps can affect Confederate support and reinforcements. It's apparently a good challenge and worth the time to learn how to play.
And then Mosby's Raiders also came
Okay,
out.
that's so that, and of course, if you want to know what Eric Lee Smith looked like in the day, just look at the cover.
Really?
So that was remember that was a very cool solitaire game about a Confederate partisan. What is it, the something Virginia regiment? But it's they're irregulars, and if you go in Northern Virginia, I've been in. There's an area called Mosby's Confederacy still.
Yes.
Not very PC down there. And, and you go there and, they got signs and flags and, that's the area he operated in Northern Virginia, which is, like over in Fairfax County, I guess, or over in that, towards Leesburg area. So it's a solitaire game. And that was, a lot of people still play that game. I mean,
it's got quite a following.
Yeah, no, it's a solitaire games, now have become in vogue, but that was one of the earlier, entries into this play alone. Like Dunnigan back in the day had done a survey at SPI, through S&T, and basically more than half, so let's call it 60% of gamers were playing SPI games solitaire.
Yeah.
So we knew, and that's why they did Operation Olympic, and they did, I think Wolfpack is also a solitaire game. So they started doing a solitaire series because of that knowledge now. And then you have when Dunnigan did Wreck of the HMS Pandora, which is Alien. But and that was it's a great little game, by the way, if you haven't ever played it. But that whole, and so Mosby is in that in that tradition of pure solitaire game with no. I don't think there's even a 2-player option in that game.
No, I don't think so. No,
I don't believe so. Yeah, it's just the way. So that's Eric Lee.
Sixth Fleet Modern Naval Combat in the Mediterranean is the first of Victory Games' Fleet series, in this case simulating naval warfare in the Mediterranean Sea during the Cold War era, and focusing on potential conflicts between NATO and Warsaw Pact forces. Players take on the roles of naval commanders controlling fleets of ships and submarines from various countries. The game includes a large map of the Mediterranean divided into sea zones where players maneuver their naval forces. There are detailed rules for movement, combat, and other aspects of naval operations. Players must make strategic decisions to outmaneuver their opponents, protect their own forces, and achieve their objectives. The game is known for its historical accuracy and strategic depth, and has scenarios that run between 1 and 20 hours to play.
The Fleet series, Sixth Fleet, came out.
So that's Joe Balkowski, and that was great. So remember, Gulf Strike, modern, well, we call them modern games, but games on all, possible, remember Jim Dunnigan created the entire, what I'll call contemporary what if games. He did, Red Star, White Star, and the original NATO, by the way,
Yes.
and things like that. And so Jim had created that category, and then I fell into it. I talked about that, but I read all the manuals in the U.S. Army because they got them from Firefight, and so I did October War. So I became like Jim's. I was the other guy at SPI who did contemporary games. So I was like Jim's backup on that area. So when Joe pitched to us, this modern naval game, we said, hey, great. And Walkowski is a phenomenal designer and talent. So he started his Sixth Fleet, Second Fleet, et cetera.
Yes.
So that's the Fleet series comes up.
Pax Britannica, the colonial era, 1880 to the Great War, simulates the competition between European powers for colonial territories from 1880 to World War I. Players control major nations and manage diplomacy, trade, colonization, and military conflict to expand their empires and achieve victory. It is a game rich in negotiation, strategy, and history with asymmetrical sides, but does suffer from some bad components and some convoluted rules, not to mention the math involved in determining your empire's income and expenses.
Okay, so that's Greg Kostikian, and that's a cool game. We play. See, one of the things, one of the policies I had at SPI. I've been around so many companies, they all blend together. Victory Games, every Wednesday, and today is Wednesday. So if you were Victory Games today in 1984, what you would be doing on the R&D stage, we'd be playing games all day. This is what we played each other's games, and we had it. So we were all. So although there was a primary designer, you were getting a lot of input from other people. So I got input from Nick Karp and John Butterfield on Pacific War. John and the HQ system that I was using in Pacific War is basically finds its way into Hell's Highway because it solved a lot of where the game was at that time issues. Pax Britannica, the whole game was well play tested by we would literally all of us, it's a multiplayer game. We'd all play it. And with Greg there, and work on the game. So everybody worked on all the games through the Wednesday play testing, and I think that's what really. We didn't have any dogs. You could say you didn't like the topic, but everything was well designed and well developed because you were not just getting one person's individual take on it, but you were getting a lot of very high end. Play testing from other professionals. So I think that's really what might have been the secret sauce for the product quality.
Yeah. And you were a very tight-knit group as well. You're all.
Yes. When I look, we were all friends.
Yeah.
And to be fair, that was a real challenge for me because they were my friends, but I was also the head of the company. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, like they say in Highlander, there can only be one.
Yeah.
And so I would say that they all stayed tight. I became less of their friend, and we all get along well now, but I had to sometimes do unpopular things, which made me less popular. But as my wife, my brilliant wife, I'm looking at cooking, she's making broccoli burgers right now. She said, you're their boss, you can't be their friend. And she was right. And that was a very hard lesson for me to learn at that age. I was only in my 20s.
Yeah.
I guess I was in my early 30s at this point. Yeah, it's 84. I turned 30 in 84. So, it was a hard thing to be, 30 with a young father and then having to run a company. And, like I said, apparently I didn't piss them off too badly because we're all getting along great these days. So, but to their credit, they respected what I was trying to do. And, eventually so yes, it was a tight knit company. Everybody respected everybody. Everybody got along, and there was no yelling matches or there was no office drama. There was none of that. But getting things produced, and it's a company, and so at the end of the day, although it's great work, it's still work.
Yeah.
There's the fun part of game design is about 10%. Then what separates, what I'll call I'm doing my first game. I've been working on it for 8 years, and it's my baby thing, to a professional line designer. Because remember, we were full-time employees designing games, so we didn't have, I didn't have to go to another job, and I didn't have anything else to do. And like when I did Pacific War, that was a 24/7 research. I was working on that thing 11, 12 hours a day for 8 months. It was intense, but that's what I did for a living. And the end product was thankfully a really game-changing for me.
Victory Games had also published an insert within Avalon Hill's The General magazine called The Victory Insider. It showcased the board games of Victory Games, acting as both a promotional tool and as an outlet for fans of the games that were not often featured in the pages of The General. It ran for a total of 8 issues, beginning in 1983 and ending in 1985.
But that was the thing. Victory Games had their little insert in the General magazine.
I was the editor of that, actually. Yeah, one of the things that was one of the. So I'll tell this last tale. So we put the insider, and it was 8 issues, I think, total. And what I discovered, remember, I was running the company, and I'm trying to get. One of the things that broke Victory Games up is as sales fell off. Economics is everything. I couldn't get raises for the staff. There was a freeze on salary increases, and I said, but I looked, but I'm pretty good. I'm not in financial services, but I ran a very big business for Booz Allen. I know how to do numbers. Adding, subtracting. I'm pretty good at that. And I said, but we made all this money, and then they showed me that what they were charging us, and then I got to see the charges that they put against our side of the ledger, and the insider was they were charging us for the insider, big money too, by the way. We were basically paying for the general, so they were.
Oh wow!
and I said, but why are we paying all this? The general comes out anyway. What's the and whatever the answer was, I didn't like. So I said, okay, well, we're not going to do so that's what killed the insider, is that I said, we won't do the insider, stop charging us this money, and I want to give raises to the staff. And I was able to negotiate a raise of some sort out of that. And that's how it happened. So the insider died for the raises of the staff. The rationale was I was looking after the staff. That's why the insider died. Nothing noble about it. It's just economics. I wanted to keep the company going, and keeping them in the house was certainly a priority for me.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
That's what killed the insider. But 8 good issues, by the way.
I thought there was some really good.
I have one copy of each. I have a file somewhere. I have 8 copies. I have 1 copy of each one in a file somewhere. I haven't looked at them in years. I should take a look.
Yeah.
But not bad.
Yeah. By 1986, Victory Games was well established with its Fleet series, Ambush Games, and Gulf Strike, all of which grew further that year. Second Fleet is a strategic naval war game and the second game based on Victory Games' Fleet system. It focuses on the Soviet Red Banner Northern Fleet and the US Second Fleet, along with NATO allies, in a hypothetical conflict for control of the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. Players command these fleets, protecting aircraft carriers and capital ships from modern weapons, while deploying submarines and air assets strategically. The game simulates modern naval warfare realistically, with players choosing between sub, surface, and air phases in each 8-hour turn. Detection of enemy forces is crucial, especially for submarines. Optional rules include nuclear weapons and logistics, and the game offers scenarios of varying lengths, from 60-minute intros to multi-hour advanced scenarios. It's a good sequel to the original 6th Fleet, although it may not be quite as good. The Korean War, June 1950 to May 1951, is an operational level wargame that simulates the first year of the Korean War, from the initial North Korean attack to the UN forces' invasion of Incheon and the subsequent drive into North Korea, which led to the Chinese counterattack. The game includes two 22 by 34 inch map sheets with a scale of 7.5 miles per hex and 1 month per turn. Units in the game represent divisions, regiments, and brigades. This underestimated gem of a game is worth checking out as a playable simulation of the beginning of the Korean War. Aegean Strike provides a detailed and realistic simulation of modern warfare, emphasizing the interaction between ground, air, and naval forces. The game's sequence of play is highly interactive, allowing players to respond to changing battle situations. It integrates combat arms at both the operational and strategic levels. Scenarios range from a Libyan-Egyptian war to the Turkish missile crisis, Greco-Turkish war, and scenarios depicting World War III. While Gulf Strike is not required to play Aegean Strike, a link-up scenario is included for players who own both games.
Yeah, so Aegean Strike obviously is just a follow-on to Gulf Strike, and because of an experience I had a lot of knowledge about that particular area. So, and I was going to do all of, just like the Fleet series, I was going to do, and as it turns out, there's a company called VUCA. It's a German company. They did Red Strike, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
And I'm going to work with them. They're going to redo Gulf Strike. I'm going to work with them.
Oh, so nice.
I get to do Gulf Strike again.
Go back under the hood of that one.
Well, they've already done that. They took Gulf Strike and they basically, the bones of Red Strike is Gulf Strike, and then apparently the designer Yves Rattel, very nice man, he was a huge fan of that original series, and so it's been very pleasant.
Yeah,
I've seen them in England in a couple of weeks, so it'd be nice to actually meet them.
Battle Hymn is a solitaire game set in the Pacific during World War II, focusing on combat, adventure, and heroism. Using a programmed paragraph approach similar to the ambush game system, players control a squad of American Marines and navigate through various missions against a dynamic Japanese enemy. The game offers unexpected events and tactical choices, providing virtually endless solitaire enjoyment. With easily learned rules, even inexperienced players can quickly embark on their first mission. Players select their squad, arm them, choose their mission, and then advance through the game until events trigger unexpected challenges, turning routine actions into life or death struggles. It plays very similarly to Ambush, although one can't necessarily use the same tactics to win.
Oh, Battle Hymn, yeah. So that's the Marine version of Ambush.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was so what happened, so you have, I want to mention another name of a guy who was very important to SPI. Again, I'm doing that. Victory Games. Joe Reiser. So Joe Reiser was a gamer friend, but he was a composer, and eventually had a very long, he lives in China now, but he had his career teaching music to ballerinas. In other words, because ballerinas obviously dance to all this music, but they don't necessarily understand. So he taught them measure, meter, and all that. They learn how to read music, and then so when they were dancing to it, they would understand what they were dancing to, from the rhythm of it. And he wrote a textbook on it and all this. So Joe was a friend of mine, and I brought him in because nobody wanted to work on Ambush. It was just too much. Everybody wanted the modules. It was very popular, and obviously we're going to keep doing it. But Butterfield and Smith said, "I ain't doing this anymore." And I had done some, and I was like, "I don't want to do this." So my solution to anything is you outsource. So I went and brought Joe Reiser in, and I don't remember. You have to look at the modules. Silver Star might have been his first, or Purple Heart. I don't remember, but he was the guy who did all the work on, and then all the expansions thereafter.
France 1944, the Allied Crusade in Europe, was designed by Mark Herman and features the breakout and pursuit across France after D-Day during World War II. With 130 counters representing units at the division level and one map board, it is a subtle and sophisticated game that stands out for its unique gameplay and requires considerable forethought to play well. The game depicts the mismatch between the Allied and German armies during the 1944 campaign, as the German player strategically withdraws as the Allies advance. It's rated as low complexity and medium solitaire suitability, and has a unique way to model time. Each turn, HQs are activated, which then control varying numbers of infantry or armor units based on nationality. A track display is used for movement and combat, where decisions branch along the track, limiting future options. A mechanic that both represents the cost in time of certain actions and simplifies gameplay, despite its complexity and description.
But France 44 was an interesting. That was another interesting journey because the game was literally designed in Yorktown Heights, New York, at about 1 o'clock in the morning. Oh. I was sitting there, and I don't know. Oh, my daughter she was not a great sleeper. Luckily for her, that's not the case with her youngest. Great, she sleeps well, but and so I was up, and I had this map, and I just sat down on the floor, I was looking at it, and the game just jumped into my head the way it is, and wow. It was, and when it came out in 1986 it came out?
86, yeah.
Yeah, when that came in 86, everybody, when I say everybody hated it. It was like, what the hell is this? They hated it, and we only sold for Victory Games used to sell like 25 to 35,000 copies was a standard sale for a Victory game. We only sold like 16,000, maybe 17,000. I don't remember the exact numbers.
Yeah,
but we considered it a big failure, and there was a couple of things wrong. One, there was this box that had no. Everybody looked at physical weight of the box. And even today, if you look online when people say, I got this new game, oh my God, it's so heavy, So, I mean, I was joking, and I joked back then and said, if we had just stuck a brick in the thing, it would have. But all you got was like 100. It was a very small counter sheet. It was a paper map, and it was a very small set of rules. And he had a 2-inch box, and it was just like, what's in here? Nobody thought enough about this because there's not a lot of stuff in here,
Yeah.
And then a guy who I've become very friendly with, a guy named Judd Vance, back not too long ago, I mean, a couple of years ago, found this copy of this game, and became he was like online, like an evangelical preacher, You guys don't realize, and what was interesting the remake from Compass, right? Yeah, Compass. When I redid the game with Compass, it's the same game with a little bit of cleaning up, and Judd did a great development job on the rules, and he also added this little mini map. So because you're starting, I don't have D-Day in it. It's from the Normandy breakout at Cobra, so you've got these big piles of pieces all smushed up in Normandy, and they break out, which is the history.
Yeah.
But with a little mini map, and so you could let initial setup doesn't you don't have stacks 20 feet high. You could spread things out on this mini map, and then once they leave that map, they're all spread out again, so you don't have that problem. But that came, but then also people going, wow, this is a really innovative design, and it's very. I mean, I haven't seen anything like this. And then it was done back in '86. I go, what? So you can see I was about 25 years ahead of the curve on that one, but the people hated it at the time. And I was like, what did I do wrong here? I kind of like this game.
Yeah. Well, back then it was bigger was better, right? That was the era of the monster game.
Well, I go back to this silliness. Like when you get a video game, you or a video game reviewer, it has no weight, right? It's all on the internet. It's all electrons. But a game like Pacific War, when they got Pacific War in the box with all the paper is 10 pounds. I mean, in fact, when I got my comp copies, and I said, I could do some curls with it. I was doing curls with it. So that's something that gets everybody very, very excited. Oh, it's so heavy. It's so heavy. And I'm just going like, well, what about, is the thinking inside heavy? I mean, that's what I think is.
Yeah.
But it's just an interesting curiosity of human behavior. It has not changed by the way.
It goes back to, it's probably as old as time, where if you pay money for something and you get a lot, it feels like you're getting a lot of value, and it's measured by the
I can
weight
tell
of
you,
all the paper.
you should go for the brick. The
Yes.
brick,
Yeah,
brick would have helped.
Playboy, the game of elegant lifestyles, is based on the lifestyle and brand of Playboy magazine, founded by Hugh Hefner, and on the Parker Brothers game Careers. In the game, players move around the board as bunnies, trying to become the first to reach the Playboy Club. Along the way, they collect Playboy Club keys by answering questions about fashion, entertainment, and other topics related to the Playboy lifestyle. The game also includes Playboy Advisor cards, which offer advice on various topics, as well as Playmate cards featuring photos of Playboy models. The game is designed to capture the glamour and sophistication associated with the Playboy brand. James Bond 007 Assault game uses as its setting the famous movie Assault on the secret rocket base from You Only Live Twice. It creates a unique opportunity for role players and simulation gamers to come together in a fast-paced, exciting game of commando combat. In this game, one player takes on the role of the villain Karl Ferenc Scorpios and his team, aiming to launch a rocket from their secret volcano base. The other player controls James Bond, Tiger Tanaka, Kissy Suzuki, and their ninja band, who must descend from the top of the base to thwart the plan. Players move individual pieces representing main characters and their troops across the multi-level base, engaging in fire combat and hand-to-hand battles as the launch countdown progresses. The game features easy-to-understand rules, allowing players to quickly start playing the 4 scenarios. Additionally, there are rules for solitaire and Game Master play, enhancing the game's variety and replayability. 1987 is the year that Mark Herman left Victory Games for other pursuits, but the company continued with some stellar designs. Seventh Fleet is the third game in the Fleet series, focusing on naval warfare in the Pacific Ocean from the Sea of Okhotsk to the northern Philippines, and from the coast of China to Guam. Players command task forces of ships, submarines, and air wings to engage the enemy. Each unit has ratings for various types of combat, defense, movement, and detection. Units include aircraft, ships, and submarines from the US, Japan, Soviet Union, China, and other countries, ranging from F-15s to Nimitz carriers to Romeo submarines. The game turn is divided into 3 phases: sub, surface, and air, with players choosing which phase to conduct each turn. Players must also detect enemy forces to initiate attacks. Optional rules include nuclear weapons and logistics. Seventh Fleet includes about 15 scenarios ranging from 90 minutes to 3 or 4 hours, as well as several campaigns that can take days to complete. Many people online state that this installment of the Fleet series is their favorite. Silver Star is the third and final expansion for Ambush. It features 6 new challenging scenarios set in Italy, including new weapons, vehicles, enemies, and maps. These scenarios are designed to provide a tough challenge for experienced Ambush characters, offering a fresh and engaging experience in the Italian theater of World War II. Central America, the United States Backyard War was designed by James McQuaid and developed by Mark Herman, and features extensive rules and 780 counters. Despite significant interest in the topic, it received a lukewarm response from buyers. However, it managed to win the 1987 Charles S. Roberts Award for Best Modern Era Board Game. It is a comprehensive simulation of modern land and air combat, blending conventional and guerrilla warfare in a dynamic game system. Players have control over the intensity and level of detail, with options ranging from introductory scenarios to full-scale campaigns. The game includes 4 introductory scenarios to teach the basics, 5 intermediate scenarios for a night's play, and 7 campaign scenarios covering various aspects of war in Central America, including the historical fall of Somoza, a U.S. invasion of Nicaragua, and scenarios depicting World War III. The game is complex, though, and not for casual gamers. Nightmare on Elm Street, the game, is a card and board game based on the popular horror character Freddy Krueger. Players try to escape from Freddy's nightmare by navigating a maze and running towards wakefulness. Freddy, controlled by the game's special deck of cards, pursues the players, adding suspense to the game. Players must strategize and make decisions to outsmart Freddy and be the first to escape the nightmare. It's reportedly not a great game by any measure, being quite repetitive, but it's not bad either. Omaha Beachhead Battle for the Bocage is a grand tactical simulation of the American amphibious assault on Normandy's coast on June 6, 1944, and the subsequent 10-day battle for the beachhead. Each player controls a force of infantry, artillery, tanks, and other units in turns representing one day of battle. The game includes a detailed map of Normandy, unit counters, and rules reflecting the actual terrain and events of the campaign. With a medium complexity level, the game offers solitaire playability and a playing time of 2 to 5 hours. Things rolled along in 1988, but with only 3 new games and an expansion, indicating that the company might be losing steam. Leatherneck is a 4-mission module for the Battle Hymn solitaire game, designed to push your squad to its limits. The module is fully compatible with the components of Battle Hymn, featuring new rules, missions, playing pieces, and map sheets. Players lead their squad through challenging environments, from steaming jungles to shell-torn beaches, facing a cunning enemy. The module includes 60 new character vehicle cards, 11 new mission cartridges, 108 new counters, and a new paragraph mission booklet, offering an exciting and dangerous continuation of the Battle Hymn experience. Lee vs. Grant: The Wilderness Campaign of 1864 simulates the spring campaign of that year that took place in Virginia during the American Civil War, known as the Wilderness Campaign. Players control Union and Confederate armies, with each turn representing 5 days. Units represent approximately 2,500 men led by a leader, and the map covers an area between Fredericksburg and Petersburg at a scale of 1 to 200,000. The game has 2 versions, Basic and Advanced. The Basic game introduces movement and unit activation, while the Advanced game adds sea movement, supply, and additional leader rules. Victory conditions vary based on the scenario. The history here is apparently controversial, as this was an instance when 2 armies led by their respective premier generals faced off, but many mistakes were made by both leaders in the real conflicts. This game is considered the first in the Great Campaigns of the American Civil War series by the same designer, Joseph M. Balkowski, but published by a different company with a different map art style. It is an underrated classic. Open Fire: Solitaire Tank Combat in World War II is a solo wargame that immerses players in World War II armored combat. Inspired by the award-winning Ambush system, it lets players command a platoon of American tanks on various missions against dynamic German forces. The game offers variable events, numerous tactical options, and unexpected occurrences, distinguishing it from other tactical armor games. With easily learned rules, players can quickly dive into action, selecting their platoon, vehicles, and unit ratings. After choosing one of 6 missions, players send their platoon into operations, where things are quiet until an enemy pops up, triggering the more intense action rounds. The rules, however, are apparently a mess, with errata that actually made things worse and not better. And there are only 6 missions, which limits the game's replayability. But the game itself is allegedly great, though it didn't attract the same love as Ambush did. Tokyo Express: The Guadalcanal Naval Campaign 1942 simulates the naval battles around Guadalcanal in the Pacific theater of World War II that year. It can be played both solitaire and 2-player, where players take on the roles of naval commanders, controlling fleets of ships from the United States, Japan, and other Allied and Axis powers. The game includes a map of the Guadalcanal area, where players maneuver their ships and engage in combat. In the solitaire version of Tokyo Express, you command the US fleet, preparing for the Tokyo Express to emerge from the darkness. You organize your ships into formations, assign orders, and select targets for torpedoes and guns. Simple mechanisms realistically control Japanese maneuvers and target assignments, with combat occurring unpredictably until torpedo salvos explode, signaling a surprise attack by Japanese forces. The 2-player version adapts the solitaire game for competitive play, recreating World War II naval combat. Tokyo Express is designed with graduated complexity to help you learn the rules as you play. In his design notes, John Southard states, "In your initial encounter with Tokyo Express, you will, I hope, feel some of the frustration and awe the American admirals did. The objective throughout was to give you their bridge eye view. You may be defeated often at first, but you should find your own solutions, as the US admirals finally did. It is a highly respected and ingenious game system that rewards repeated play." 1989 ended up being the final year of business for Victory Games, although there were some titles, most of which were in the pipeline at the end, that came out after the company folded.
Yeah, 87 is when I think I left in November of 87. So that's when I left Victory Games. So, for me, that's fun. And although I wasn't the guy who, there was a guy named Kevin Boylan who I had hired. I think he was the one who actually turned off the lights, but it was just Kevin there by himself because, Eric Lee left, I left, John Butterfield had already left.
Yeah.
And so eventually, the whole, the thing, went away. And Bob Royer came with me to Washington, so he was like the head. He was the, we were the two. He was head of editorial. I was head of company, and so we both went to Booz Allen, and the place just.
The Game of Good Cooking is another odd entry in the Victory Games lineup, produced in conjunction with spice company McCormick Schilling. In this game, players race to be the first to prepare a week's worth of meals. They start by stopping at the bank for shopping money, then visiting the supermarket to select menus, and finally heading to the shopping mall to buy appliances like a microwave or food processor to speed up the meal preparation. Then a race begins to see who can complete their main course, side dish, and appetizer or dessert. The game came out a year after Avalon Hill's partnership with the same company produced the game Spices of the World. While cute in concept, this game overstays its welcome as the final space, dinner is served, must be landed on with an exact die roll, which has always been one of the worst board game mechanisms. Fifth Fleet is the fourth game in the Fleet series and focuses on the Indian Ocean, where the Soviet, Indian, and American navies operate along with their allies in the region. Players must protect their capital ships, submarines, and air assets from various modern naval weapons, while attacking the enemy with the same. Like other games in the series, Fifth Fleet offers a realistic simulation of modern naval combat with multiple options and strategies. It is a streamlined game without the reinforcement and political events, and might be the best entry point to the series, although Fleet series veterans might be disappointed. The basic scenarios are apparently quite easy to teach, and the emphasis not only on tactics but on logistics as well make for a compelling entry to the series. As the 1990s began, so did a tough era for board gaming. As Victory Games had already run out of gas, there were only 7 more games published under the Victory Games banner. Third Fleet is the 5th installment in the Fleet series and includes 3 games in one, each focusing on a different region: the North Pacific, the Caribbean, and the Eastern Atlantic. Players control surface ships, submarines, and aircraft with the goal of preserving their fleet and destroying the enemy one. The game offers scenarios suitable for solitaire play and is up to the usual standard as a realistic simulation of modern naval combat. While the rulebook received some well-earned kudos, the game is generally considered to be the weakest of the Fleet series. Carrier, the Southwest Pacific Campaign 1942 to 1943, is a solitaire wargame that simulates carrier battles in that theater at that time. Players command U.S. forces, maneuvering task forces, and conducting air searches to locate Japanese carriers before they attack. Game mechanics control Japanese movement and determine the timing and strength of their attacks, keeping players in suspense until enemy strikes are revealed. The game has the goal of presenting tactical challenges similar to those faced by historical commanders, and as a simulation it succeeds, although it is a complex game to learn. Jeff Petraska in Fire and Movement issue 73 described the game as both challenging and suspenseful, particularly in the search for the Japanese fleet and strategic decision-making. However, he criticized the game for leaning too heavily on luck rather than skill. Desert Shield Gulf Strike is an expansion for Gulf Strike that updates the second edition of the core game with new scenarios, rules, and counters that cover the First Gulf War. The expansion includes a 12-page rule and scenario booklet featuring Saddam Hussein on the cover, as well as a counter sheet with 260 new counters. Players need to own Gulf Strike 2nd Edition to play the Desert Shield scenarios, as they utilize the rules, maps, and counters from the base game. Shell Shock is a 2-player board game set in World War II Europe, based on the popular Ambush solitaire game. Each player commands a squad of either German infantry or American, British, or Soviet troops across 6 missions. Players customize their squads with men, weapon, and equipment, and can purchase weapons and support items like foxholes and artillery. The game offers varied gameplay with changing battle intensity, mission objectives, and weather. Mark Herman's Flashpoint Golan is a game simulating a hypothetical 5th Arab-Israeli war, focusing on the conflict in Israel's northern and eastern borders, including the Golan Heights. The game features Israel, Syria, and Jordan as major combatants, with potential intervention from the US or Soviet Union. The simulation uses a highly interactive sequence of play, allowing players to detect and react to each enemy move or action. It offers a scenario generation system for varied gameplay, ensuring that scenarios rarely start under the same conditions. It is a complex but rewarding game that implements some concepts like momentum and a political dimension that are not normally included in wargames. Mark Herman also designed the Peloponnesian War 431 to 404 BC, which simulates the conflict between Athens and Sparta in ancient Greece, with players controlling Greek city-states and managing diplomacy, economics, and military strategy to win the war. It is essentially a solitaire game that involves switching sides whenever one side gets too far ahead, and is simple enough to be played in an evening.
But you did have two last games that came out with them, which was Flashpoint Golan and Peloponnesian War.
Right, and I did those as freelance jobs.
Okay.
Now I'm a freelancer at this point,
Yeah.
and yeah, well, Flashpoint Golan, well, Peloponnesian War was a different situation. So Jim Dunnigan, for about a year in the 1990 period. So I've been working now. I've been gone now 2 or 3 years, and I was always, in fact, I had lunch with Jim. Just he's just turning 80. He and Al Nofi and I get together for lunch a couple times a year. So I just had lunch with them. They were in good shape. So Jim became the editor for Strategy and Tactics magazine for a short while, and he contacted me. He said, "I want you to do a game for me," and I don't remember how remember my original degree was in fifth century Aegean history, so so that was probably the main genesis of it. And he said, "I want you to do this game." So I said, "Fine." It sounded like a fun thing to do. So I started working, I was commuting back and forth from Washington, from New York. And my little daughter is older now, but, she's still only 4 at this point. And I'm working on Peloponnese, and I decided and it was, I think Jim wanted it to be a solitaire game. So I think that's what ended up happening. So he was I want you to do a solitaire game. And I chose the Peloponnesian War just because it was an area of interest for me. And then Jim left the position, and I think this is the time when the Poulters owned it. I think it was Keith Poulter owned it. And I like Keith Poulter, but he's not really good on the business side. He's not good at paying his bills on time. And so as soon as he missed his first payment, I just, I wasn't in the mood of I wasn't going to take him to court. Yeah. And I just wasn't in the mood for a lot of aggravation. And a couple of other friends who've been dealing with him were saying, I'm always chasing him for every nickel. And I just said, you know what? I'm not going to do this. I haven't got time for this. I got a real job. I got a family, and I'm not chasing after, $1,000 for doing this work. Yeah. So I contacted Don Greenwood over at Avalon Hill, and he said, send it over, and they decided to publish it. So that's how it came out as a Victory game. The Victory Games label, and I think maybe that's how the only time I ever really dealt with Leonard Palm, and I knew Kevin. So it was probably, but I gave them a complete game. I don't remember them changing anything other than, and I remember Ted Kohler did the map. He must have been still around, because that's a Ted Kohler. In fact, that's an remember, if you look at it carefully, it's an airbrush map.
Oh, interesting.
The background map is airbrushed if you look at it carefully. It looks really good. He had gotten very good at making mountains and all this kind of jazz. So it looks really good. So that and a funny story around that is, so the game has come out, or is about to come out, from Victory Games. I mean, it's Avalon Hill doing it, but I didn't know it was going to be a Victory Games label until I saw the box. But it was an Avalon Hill. That's who I was dealing with. I was dealing with Avalon Hill, not with there was nobody at Victory Games to deal with, really, and for production. And I'm at a convention in, I want to say Milwaukee, but it was somewhere in the Midwest, but I think it was Milwaukee. And it's late at night. I'm coming back with a guy named Richard H. Berg. I don't know if you know Richard Berg.
Richard Berg, yeah.
And Gene Billingsley, who's the head of GMT, who I'm now working with. So this is after 1990, because Gene, that's when I met Gene. So we're walking through the hall, and I see this table set up, and it's obviously it looks to me like I go to the guy, goes, "Is this a Peloponnesian War game?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, that's really cool." He goes, and Avalon Hill was, and then he says to me, because again, this is before the internet, so no, he doesn't know what I look like. He goes, and Avalon Hill was going to publish it until and he said something rude about me, that Mark Herman guy gave them their game and they canceled mine.
Oh boy.
And I go, Mark Herman, I hate that guy. He goes, I hate him too. And so we both talk about hating me for a while, and he felt better. And Gene Billingsley and Richard Berg are falling down on the floor in the corner. They're laughing so hard. This long conversation. I mean, I was talking to the guy for like 5 minutes about, how much Mark Herman is a no talent bum, and he goes, "Oh yeah," so it was really very cathartic for me. And I had never met him since. And
Yeah, he's probably stayed away from you out of
well, again,
embarrassment.
he didn't know who I was. I said, "Well, anyway, good luck with it." I saw a game come out from a company that looked like it, but it's just like the problem with Peloponnesian war games, like any World War II game, the map is going to look like Greece, right? Or it's going to be Europe. So the Pacific looks like the Pacific. So you can't tell. I don't know anything about the guy's system, so I don't know if it ever got published, but it was
Yeah.
a pretty funny moment. And of course, I never planned on redoing that one, but Gene Billingsley wanted it, and I said, okay. So we redid Peloponnesian War, but and that was the one nice thing about that was I got the one time Chad Jensen, God rest his soul, was the developer. So
Oh,
it was a really solid. It was well. It looks really good because of Chad. I mean, he's a real. I mean, Chad was a great designer, but also he was a very talented graphic artist.
yeah.
So he knew his way around an art program. That's for sure.
Yeah. And then Flashpoint Golan.
Yeah, well, that was
Um,
based on Flashpoint Golan, actually, which has now been reimagined for Defiance.
yeah.
So when I was in the Pentagon, there was something called the RMA, the Revolutionary Military Affairs. And so that game is a very real simulation and is basically held up through the Ukraine war. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a very serious piece of work. I did it on an Arab-Israeli war, which we may see again, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, but the game system is this very serious system, and so we're using that as that. The bones of that is this new Defiance game I'm doing with GMT on the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war. Well, the continuation of the war actually started in 2014, but this is the
Yes.
invasion, the real invasion of, and the battle for Kyiv is what the game's about. But we use that
Wow.
system. But again, as I said, I've evolved. So the game has very different kind of combat system, very different. The bones of the movement and everything, and the sequence of play is there. But how I handle HQs and capabilities and combat is much more how I would do it now, which is what I'm
Yes.
doing. So you know,
Yeah.
what I'm doing these days. Like if you look at Rebel Fury, I'm looking more for. I want to go to what I really want. I was telling you, but we were talking about conventions. I don't know if that was part of the recording or not, but I want to go to a convention and I look at the games of mine that get played at conventions because I like people to play my games. And certain when I did Pericles, which is one of my favorite designs.
Yes. I actually have it on the shelf behind me.
Yeah, when I go to conventions, people are playing it because it's a
Yeah.
4-player game. And although it's got a good solo mode, I think it's a good solo mode because that's how I play it most of the time. Um, it's really meant to be a 4-player game. And when you get 4 players, and so when you get 4 players, mostly at a convention. I
Yeah.
see Churchill play at conventions.
Got that
Uh,
on my shelf back there as well.
God bless you. And then I see, and of course, there's the big WBC for the People tournament that's been going on forever.
Yeah.
There is an Empire of the Sun tournament that a guy named Chris Crane ran for. I don't know if they're going to run it this. I haven't been to WBC in years, so I really don't know what's going on. But I want to go to a convention and see people playing my games, and I finally decided that as a lot of war gamers are. You're a much younger guy, but a lot of war gamers are not. We're contemporaries, and so what I hear from them is, I don't want to get into 100 pages of rules anymore. I don't want a game. I want a game I can set up, play, and I want to set up a game at 1 o'clock and watch football at 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Rebel Fury is that game, and
Oh,
it seems to be getting that kind of response. People saying, "Oh, it's," they're saying good things about it. You could read them online. I don't need to repeat them, but
yeah.
at my core, I'm still a gamer. I mean, I mean. So Richard Berg was, one of my closest friends, and you know, and look, everybody has. I had my quirks. He had his quirks, and And my joke was, he was a great designer, fabulous writer, had an eidetic memory, but he was a lousy game player. I mean, he was terrible.
Yeah.
And so he would get a new game and say, I want you to play this with me. I said, sure. So I'd sit down and play this game with him. And inevitably, I would be prevailing. And he'd go, oh, I don't want, and he would change the rules. As I'm playing against him, he would change the rules to stop me doing whatever I was doing. And maybe that's what he wanted or not, but it was
Yeah.
it was, he was going to engineer a situation where it was the minimum was going to be a draw, but it was always based on the fact that he was just, that was the one that, like we all have, we can't be good at everything, but
Yeah.
I actually do like playing games, and I'm not a great game player, but I'm not a lousy one either. So,
Yeah.
I'm in a game that I really know how to play Empire of the Sun. So yeah, I do pretty well.
Across 5 Aprils is a 2-player tactical level board war game that covers 5 battles of the American Civil War: Bull Run, Pea Ridge, Shiloh, Gettysburg, and Bentonville. Each battle is a separate game with its own set of counters and map, but they all use the same basic system. Players pull a chit to activate formations for movement, and if the combat chit is drawn, all combats are resolved. Formations and unit sizes vary from division to corps for formations and from regiment to brigade for units. It is a game that is quick to learn and play, and despite some quirks, is a fun game that works well.
In 92, Across 5 Aprils came out.
Well, yeah, but see, at that point,
Was that after
April, there is no Victory Games. That's just a label that that game was done by Eric Lee, but it was published fundamentally through Avalon Hill's production side.
Okay.
Yeah, it was done almost as a freelance job at that point, because I'm gone. I'm at Booz Allen at that point, starting my career back up in defense consulting.
Sex Quest is a card game that once again featured Dr. Ruth Westheimer, where players respond to actual situations and questions that were posed to Dr. Ruth on her radio and TV programs. Look at the Schmuck on That Camel is a Yiddish trivia game featuring over 100 Yiddishisms with approximately 400 definitions. Players must determine if the given definitions for Yiddish words are correct. The game includes a taped performance, music, and comedy cards based on old Yiddish jokes. It was conceived and written by Wilbur Pierce. This was the last game to be released under the Victory Games label.
How do you see the legacy of Victory Games, both just in the gaming community, and what does Victory Games mean to you?
It's interesting. Well, for me, I'll start with the last part. I mean, what Victory Games means to me it was probably one of the happiest periods of my life. And I don't mean that I've had a lousy life after that, but it was like I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. I was getting paid enough that I wasn't suffering financially to do it. It was a full-time job. I was able to get a small house that I had to fix up every last inch of. It was a real fixer-upper, but I got a house. I had a young daughter. I still have the same beautiful wife. And we were just like a young family, and we were digging life and getting along great. And I had this job in the city where I was doing what I wanted to do. And it was just, best job I ever had, actually. So from my perspective, it's just, a very warm, one of those very solid periods, I guess, from 82 to 87. So what is that, 5 years?
Yeah.
So for 5 years, I had a really good time. I mean, there was a little rough spot near the end when I was like, I had to say, what am I going to do next? And my wife got pregnant again. So, I needed to do better.
Yeah.
So that's always been the driving force in my life. She does, when we finally decided to have kids, she said, I'm not going to have kids unless I can raise them. I said, all right, then I'll make the money and you raise the kids. And that wasn't like, and I don't, people live different lives, but for us, that was just what we wanted to do. And we did it. And it was great. And the kids are fantastic. And they all launched on time, and they became great parents. I got 4 grandchildren. So some big decision made in that one sentence,
Yeah.
A lot got decided. She and I, well, I guess that's why we're going to have our 45th anniversary in about a week. So yeah, there's a reason why we get along, is that we just agree on stuff, big stuff. We agree on instantaneously. So her name's Carol. She's amazing. but so that's what victory games meant to me. Now I had a great career in Washington, but now I'm back to doing what I really want to do. I'm a full-time game designer. People go, "What's it like to be retired?" And I'm like, and it used to bother me when people ask me, like, because I said, I worked like 9 hours today. Does
Yeah.
that sound like retirement to you? But because I'm having a good time, it doesn't count. Like work has to be a four-letter word, and it doesn't have to be. Let me just say that. And
Yeah.
I like making a living by just being a game designer again. So this is a great time in my life. But that 5 years, I was young and you know, different world, and it was a very good time in my life. Now, as far as the Victory Games legacy, as I've said many times, I've said this before, and at least one, this guy named Ben Maddox asked me that question, and I said, legacy is not decided by me; it's decided by the community.
Yeah.
And so I would say that what I find interesting is that, look, many games have been designed over the years, but it seems that just about every game that Victory Games did, to include ones that are yet to come out, has been reprinted with new graphics.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing we did something right. Otherwise, nobody would want to reprint them.
Yeah.
So that would be my simple
Yeah.
answer. But I think every game that I did for Victory, now to include Gulf Strike, because I didn't plan on doing that one, all of my games I did at Victory have now been reprinted. John Butterfield is now finishing up a remake of Hell's Highway with, was it a Nest, a New England Simulations, Mark Hinkle. So they're doing that. I heard that Eric Lee is doing Civil War with, I think it's Compass.
Wow.
And I know Vietnam was redone by GMT, Pacific War was
Yes.
redone by GMT, Peloponnesian War, Korean War was redone by Compass. Those are, it sounds to me like, that's the most of the catalog, not all of it, but,
Yeah.
and NATO was redone by Bruce Maxwell.
Hmm.
So, so that's pretty much all the big titles.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I think that's Victory Games' legacy, is that it's not done yet.
Yeah. That's cool. That's
Yeah,
cool.
that's my best answer.